Titanic. When we hear this name, the image of a huge luxurious ship appears before our eyes. An iceberg is the last song of the engineers, and a tragic story of about 1,500 people sinking in the cold water. For more than 100 years, the Titanic has been considered the worst maritime disaster in human history. Timeless movies have been made about its story. Numerous books have been written. But what if I told you that there is a story of a ship that sank with 6 times more people than the Titanic? A ship whose solemn tomb is the largest single maritime disaster in human history. Yet, history has almost forgotten that story. First of all, in today's episode, we will talk about that abandoned ship. Its name was MV Wilhelm Gustloff, and more than 9,000 people died on its last voyage, of which about 5,000 were children. This was not an accident. This was a cruel reality of war. This is the story of a ship that was once a symbol of joy, but it ended up in an icy mass grave. To understand the story of the Wilhelm Gustloff, we have to go back to the 1930s, when Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party were in power in Germany. Hitler wanted to win the hearts of the German people not only through military force, but also through propaganda. Part of this campaign was a huge state project called Kraft durch Freude, or Strength Through Joy. Its aim was to give ordinary German workers all the benefits that had previously been enjoyed only by the wealthy. Under this, concerts, sports, and cheap holidays were arranged. And the crowning glory of this Strength Through Joy project were 2 huge luxury Fury ships. The first and most famous of them was the Wilhelm Gustloff. When it first set sail in 1937, it was a world away. This ship, about 208 meters long, was a floating paradise. The main principle of its design was equality. Unlike the Titanic, there was no distinction between first, second, or third class. All cabins were of the same quality. All the ship's facilities, such as the swimming pool, spacious deck, gymnasium, large dining hall, and cinema, were open to everyone. It was a perfect Nazi propaganda machine. The world was being shown how happy ordinary German workers were under Nazi rule. Thousands of German families would go on vacation on this ship to the Norwegian coast or to the Portuguese island of Madeira. For them, it was the best experience of their lives. Wilhelm Gustloff became a shining symbol of peace, joy, and German engineering. But this happy day did not last long. On September 4, 1939, Germany invaded Poland and World War II began. The white paint of peace was erased and the gray paint of a warship was applied to the Wilhelm Gustloff. Its luxurious decks and cabins were converted for a different purpose. It was first used as a hospital ship, or Lazarus ship. It was converted into a floating hospital to treat wounded German soldiers in Poland and Norway. Its ballrooms became hospital wards, and instead of joy, the air smelled of pain and death. Then, from 1940 on, it was moored in the port of Gordenhoing in the Polish coast. The Germans named the port Gotenhafen. Here, the ship was no longer used for medical purposes. It became a floating fence for German U-boat or submarine sailors. The corridors of the ship where children once played were now walked by hundreds of soldiers. The symbol of joy was then completely transformed into a war machine. The most terrible chapter of the story began in January 1945. World War II was then in its last and bloodiest phase. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army was advancing towards Germany at an unstoppable speed. Millions of German soldiers, and even more ordinary German citizens, were trapped in eastern Croatia, Danzig, and other parts of Poland. The advance of the Soviet troops was filled with fire of revenge. The Red Army was desperate to take revenge for the unspeakable atrocities committed by the German forces in the Soviet Union. As a result, great panic spread among the German civilians. Millions of people left their homes and fled westward just to save their lives. In this situation, the Grand Admiral of the German Navy, Karl Dotanus, ordered the launch of a huge naval rescue operation. It was called Operation Hannibal. Its purpose was to rescue as many German soldiers and civilians as possible by sea and bring them back to Germany. It is known as the largest maritime rescue operation in history, in which more than 1 million people were rescued. The Wilhelm Gustloff, which had been anchored in the port for 5 years, was also prepared to participate in this rescue operation. On January 30th, 1945, the temperature in the port of Gotenhafen was minus 18 degrees Celsius. Ice and snow were all around. Thousands of fleeing people were gathered in the harbor. They were all refugees. Most of them were women, children, and the elderly. They were ready to do anything to get a little space on a ship to escape the hands of the Sabids. The official passenger capacity of the Wilhelm Gustloff was about 1,880 people. But that day, no rules could be followed. The captain and officers of the ship were trying to take on as many people as possible. According to the ship's registration list, the number of passengers was about 6,500, but in reality, the number was much higher. It is estimated that more than 1,500 people boarded the ship that day. The scene inside the ship was unimaginable. Every cabin, corridor, staircase, and even the empty swimming pool on the ship was packed with people. People stood piled on top of each other. There was a smell of fear, fatigue, and uncertainty in the air. There were not enough lifeboards or life jackets on the ship. What there was nothing for the vast number of people. At noon, the Wilhelm Gustloff left port and set sail for the icy waters of the Baltic Sea. With only 2 small escort ships on board, the ship was unable to pick up speed with its overloaded crew. But the passengers had only one hope: to head west. They would be safe. Little did they know that a silent killer was waiting for them underwater. A Soviet submarine, the S-13, was hunting in the depths of the Baltic Sea. Its commander was Captain Alexander Marinsko. Marinsko was a highly skilled commander, but he was arrogant and he had a reputation for drinking and breaking the rules. But he was a daring submariner, and he was desperate to win the war. In Marinsko's eyes, the Wilhelm Gustloff was not a civilian ship. It was a German military ship.
It was painted gray. It was carrying about 1,000 soldiers and had anti-aircraft guns on its deck. According to international law of war, it was a legitimate military target. That night, the Gustloff's captains made some fatal mistakes. They thought that their ship's navigation lights, or green and red lights, should be on to avoid collisions with other German ships in that part of the sea. These lights made the Gustloff an easy target for the Esther submarine, which was hiding in the darkness. Just after 9 p.m. local time, Captain Marinesko ordered 4 torpedoes to be fired. On the first torpedo, he wrote, "For the motherland," the second, "For Stalin," the third, "For the Soviet people." The 4th torpedo got stuck in the tube, but the other 3 hit their targets perfectly. The first torpedo hit the bow of the ship, where the sailors lived. The explosion killed many sailors instantly. The second and most deadly torpedo hit amidships, where the women's ward and swimming pool were located. Almost all members of the Navy's Women's Aid Society had taken refuge in this swimming pool. Almost all of them died in the explosion and in the water. The third torpedo hit the ship's engine room. Immediately, the ship's engine stopped and the electricity went out. The entire ship plunged into darkness. A hellish chaos began. People started running around screaming in panic. Many died in the darkness, trampled to death. Meanwhile, the ship began to heal very quickly on one side, and the decks became slippery like ice. Many people slipped and fell into the freezing cold water. On the other hand, the lifeboats were frozen in the cold. Some capsized while trying to lower them. Several collapsed under the weight of the people. In less than an hour, the huge ship named Wilhelm Gustloff sank into the icy depths of the Baltic Sea. But the real horror was yet to come. Thousands of people, most of whom did not have life jackets, swam in the freezing cold water of minus 18 degrees Celsius. It's not possible for a person to survive at this temperature for more than a few minutes. The cries of children and the cries of adults for help gradually merged into the silence of the night. It was an unimaginable mass death. The ships of the German Navy were able to rescue about 1,252 people alive. The remaining 9,000 people were lost that night. Among them were about 5,000 children. Never before in human history has so many children died in a single incident. But why did this terrible event not become as famous as the Titanic? There are several reasons for this. First, the reality of war. It happened at the end of the war. The Nazi government suppressed the news because they did not want the German people to be demoralized. Second, after the war, Germany was so burdened with responsibility for the Holocaust and other war crimes that they had no opportunity or mentality to portray themselves as victims. Telling the story of the suffering of the Germans meant making light of the crimes of the Nazis, which was unthinkable. Third, it was an attack by a Soviet submarine, which was legal in war. In the Western world, especially during the Cold War, the military successes of the Soviet Union were not widely publicized. Although Captain Alexander Marinesko achieved one of the greatest military successes in history, he was not given the honor of a hero in the Soviet Union. He was dishonorably discharged from the Navy for his arbitrary behavior. However, many years after his death in 1990, he was posthumously awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Wilhelm Gustloff's story was no accident. It was a direct result of war. It reminds us that war is not limited to soldiers. Its most brutal victims are ordinary, innocent people, especially women and children. History is almost always written by the victors, and some history is lost to time. Gustloff's tragedy teaches us how important stories erased from the pages of history can be. When we talk about the Titanic, we should also remember